I had been unemployed for exactly 8 months and 12 days when the email arrived in my inbox. My bank account was overdrawn, the eviction notices were piling up on my kitchen counter, and I was skipping meals to make a bag of rice last an entire week. Desperation changes the way your brain processes risk. When you have absolutely nothing left to lose, red flags just look like ordinary banners waving in the wind. The job offer came from an elite law firm located in a massive, black glass skyscraper downtown. I had applied for a generic data entry position through a third-party recruiting website weeks ago, entirely forgetting about the application until they contacted me to schedule a midnight interview. I put on my only clean suit and took the late bus into the city center. The building was completely deserted when I arrived. A silent security guard checked my identification and directed me to a service elevator that only went down. The interview did not take place in a polished boardroom with mahogany tables and leather chairs. It happened in a windowless, concrete sub-basement illuminated by harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. The man who interviewed me wore an expensive tailored suit that looked entirely out of place in the sterile, dusty environment. He asked me very few questions about my previous work experience. He mainly wanted to know about my personal life. He asked if I lived alone, if I had any close family members nearby, and how well I handled working in complete isolation. I answered honestly, explaining that I was entirely independent and desperately needed a steady income. He offered me the job immediately. The salary he quoted was staggering. It was more money than I had made in the last 3 years combined. My title would be Archival Disposal Technician, and my shift would run from midnight until 8 in the morning. My only responsibility was to operate an industrial, room-sized paper shredder to destroy old case files and classified corporate documents. I accepted the position without a second thought. I would have agreed to sweep toxic waste for that kind of money. The man nodded, handed me a heavy brass keycard, and walked me over to a large bulletin board mounted on the concrete wall next to the machine. A single sheet of laminated paper was pinned to the corkboard. "These are the operational guidelines," the man said, his voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. "Read them carefully. Follow them exactly. I will be back at 8 in the morning to relieve you." He turned and walked back to the service elevator. The heavy metal doors slid shut, and the elevator hummed as it ascended, leaving me completely alone in the sprawling, windowless basement. I walked over to the bulletin board to read the guidelines. I expected standard corporate safety warnings about keeping loose clothing away from the moving gears or wearing protective safety glasses. Instead, the laminated sheet contained only 3 typed sentences. Rule 1. Do not read the contents of the red folders. Rule 2. If the shredder jams and begins to leak a red, viscous fluid, unplug it and face the corner until the humming stops. Rule 3. If you find a photograph of yourself in the pile of documents, shred it immediately without breaking eye contact with it. Rule 4. If you hear someone knocking on the heavy steel elevator doors at 3 in the morning, do not let the door knocker enter the room. I stood there staring at the paper for a long time. The rules made absolutely no logical sense. They sounded like a prank, the kind of hazing ritual older employees use to terrify the new hire on the night shift. I assumed the management team had left the sign there to test my ability to follow instructions without asking questions. Elite corporate firms are notorious for their eccentric paranoia regarding document security and employee compliance. I decided I would simply do exactly what I was paid to do, feed paper into a machine and collect my paycheck. I turned my attention to the shredder. It was a massive piece of industrial equipment, occupying the entire center of the room. A wide rubber conveyor belt sloped upward, leading into a heavy steel hopper where interlocking rows of razor-sharp metal drums waited to grind anything into microscopic confetti. Beside the machine stood dozens of heavy cardboard boxes stacked nearly to the ceiling, all filled to the brim with paperwork. I pressed the heavy green power button on the control panel. The machine roared to life. The sound was deafening, a deep, mechanical grinding that vibrated through the concrete floor and rattled my teeth. I grabbed the first box, hauled it over to the conveyor belt, and started grabbing handfuls of manila folders. I tossed them onto the moving rubber belt and watched them travel upward before falling into the metal hopper. The steel teeth caught the paper, pulling the folders down with a violent, tearing crunch. The machine devoured the documents effortlessly, spitting a steady stream of fine white dust into an enormous clear plastic collection bag attached to the exhaust vent. The work was mindless and deeply monotonous. For the first few hours, my mind wandered as my hands automatically grabbed, tossed, and reached for more paper. The isolation of the room was heavy, pressing against my eardrums beneath the roar of the machine. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a steady rhythm. The air smelled strongly of dry paper dust, hot metal, and the faint, bitter scent of machine oil. I was emptying the 14th box of the night when I saw the first anomaly. Mixed in among the standard, beige manila folders was a single, brightly colored red folder. The thick cardstock was completely unmarked, lacking any labels, barcodes, or identifying features. I remembered the first rule on the laminated sheet. I grabbed the red folder firmly, intending to toss it directly onto the conveyor belt without opening it. My hands were coated in a fine layer of paper dust, making my grip slippery. As I swung my arm toward the belt, the folder slipped from my fingers. It hit the edge of the steel hopper and fell backward, landing flat on the concrete floor near my boots. The impact caused the folder to pop open. A thick stack of loose paper slid out, fanning across the dusty ground. I knelt down to gather the papers, fully intending to shove them back into the folder unread. However, the font on the top page was unusually large, and my eyes instinctively registered the words before I could look away. The document appeared to be a highly detailed, clinical autopsy report for a crime scene analysis. The language was cold and professional, but the subject matter was entirely impossible. It described a murder case where the victim had been completely hollowed out from the inside, their internal organs replaced with tightly compacted ash. Below the text was a detailed, hand-drawn diagram of a creature that defied all known biological logic. The illustration showed a shifting, nebulous shape composed entirely of dense, intersecting lines. The caption beneath the drawing described a shadowy entity that existed exclusively within two-dimensional spaces, hunting by attaching itself to the cast shadows of human beings. The text explicitly stated a strict containment protocol. Anyone observing the shadow must maintain unbroken eye contact with the entity, or it will immediately detach from the surface and devour the observer's physical body. I gathered the papers quickly, shoving them back into the red folder. I stood up and brushed the dust from my knees. My heart was beating slightly faster, but my rational mind quickly manufactured an explanation. Law firms handle all kinds of intellectual property disputes. I figured the company must represent a major entertainment studio, a video game developer, or a horror author involved in a copyright lawsuit. The files were likely world-building documents, script drafts, or concept art.